we look at the racial dot map for the Rust Belt, we're going to see a different pattern. We're not going to see as many Hispanics. We're not going to see as much orange dots. Not saying they're not there. In fact, in 2020, you're going to see increasingly more orange dots in a lot of these urban areas. Another thing you're going to notice is a lot of African Americans living in urban core areas, so very close to the central business district, and so that also reflects a lot of industries, and so you're also going to see African Americans living near a lot of industrial sites or former industrial sites. So that's also along railroad lines and where you have a lot of manufacturing often clustered there along kind of those more what we refer to today as brownfield sites that maybe have a lot of hazardous waste from a lot of these industries that are no longer leaving behind a lot of their remnants. And so let's just go to tour a few of these cities. Buffalo, first off. Buffalo, we can see the ethnic, residential separation quite clearly. Here you have African Americans densely populated in this particular area of East Buffalo. Down here, it's kind of the core of Buffalo. And then to the north, actually, then West Buffalo here, you can see very good amount of diversity. So Buffalo's got some, considerable amount of diversity, particularly in this western Buffalo area. Once again, there's the downtown core. Interestingly, we have this pocket of Asians. Is it a university? In this case, no. This is actually a lot of resettled refugees, a lot of Muslims from Bangladesh and other parts of Asia who've actually settled in this particular area that has historically been very much dominated by African Americans. However, a lot of African Americans have migrated out of Buffalo, whether it be to the suburbs or somewhere else. And so Buffalo does have some residential segregation, separation up here, whenever we see kind of this kind of pattern here of blues and reds, densely populated along an area where we might see some greens and other blues, those university. So here, dense a pocket of Asians there where we see University of Buffalo. Now let's go to Detroit. So we go to Detroit, Motor City, and here once again residential separation, segregation. Now this would have been much more filled in, much more dots 10, 20 years ago. However, with a lot of out-migrations occurred in Detroit over the years. And so here, let's talk about residential separation. It's almost along this line, the East 8 Mile Road. And so 8 Mile, I believe there's a movie about that, which was a guy named Eminem from the 90s, if you remember him from the 90s. But look at that. What a stark divide. And this is very common. We see in Rust Belt cities a huge amount of residential segregation. That is about as clear cut as can be. Another little pocket here, interesting, is this neighborhood here of Bangladeshis that is kind of pocketed and come in this little area here. So that's the Asians. Bangladesh is an Asian country. So you also see some Polish and Irish. A lot of Poles that have remained in this particular area. The Patsky sandwich, which is a kind of sandwich, is distinctive in this particular area, has kind of its legacy from the Polish population. You go out to other areas, you do see some Latinos that have started to populate in this particular neighborhood there, and in this kind of this over here by Dearborn, kind of where Ford used to be. But for the most part, we can see this outer rim of white people, of Caucasians there in Detroit. We go to Indianapolis. Let's go ahead and go to Indianapolis, another area we could say it's part of the Foundry, but definitely part of the Rust Belt. And here, residential separation, especially here in the near northeast side, but also on the northwest side. You do see increasingly Hispanic population, particularly there on the west side. We zoom out, we can see pockets of Asians. In particular, we see a pocket of Asian here in Burma, from Myanmar, down here in Southport, and then even further out here in suburban areas, we have Sikhs. Now, these are kind of some refugees, somewhat refugees, but a lot of chain migration that could have from particular Chin state of Burma. A lot of Christians who are persecuted, who are being ethnically cleansed in their home country because they're Christians, and so of course we're compassionate for that. And so in this Southport area, you've seen a kind of this increasing migration of Asians, in particular Burmese. Down here, it's more Sikhs. These are groups from Punjab region of India. So they are not Hindus, they're not Muslims, they're Sikhs, Sikhs, which they have populated. And this is Whiteland, Indiana. So this is suburban Indiana is starting to change. Also, we can go up to Chicago. Here, definitely going to see much more of a Latino influence. In fact, Chicago has huge amount of Mexican migrants. So we have South Chicago here, heavily African American. Then we have this heavily Latino neighborhood. So here's our Chinatown in Chicago. Very much, huge amount of residential separation. This is the neighborhood of Bridgeport. Kind of this little pocket. That's where Comiskey is, for those of you who are White Sox fans. Whereas in the north, much more affluent in this particular area of Chicago, but huge amount of residential separation. And of course, as you go out in suburban areas, definitely gets more Caucasian. Now we go up to probably the most segregated city in the entire country in terms of separation of whites in one area, blacks in another area, and that's Milwaukee. So you can really see that. And so now you're seeing this pocket of Latinos also fill in to add even more to the residential separation. But here, dense amount of African Americans in this particular area of Milwaukee, but then you go in the suburban areas, it's a very, very white population. So in the Rust Belt, we do see this pattern in terms of these white outer rings that surround these dense African American or increasingly Latino areas.